afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Domi Raymond. I'm Strategy Director for Partnerships with Lumina Foundation. Lumina is an independent private foundation committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available for all. Our mission and work are focused on increasing post-secondary attainment and ensuring that equity is at the center of all that we do. We do our work through grant making as well as thought leadership. And for us, thought leadership is bringing people together to talk about policies and best practices that help increase post-secondary attainment. So we're happy beyond measure that you've joined us today for today's webinar. Today's webinar is actually the second in a three-part series, and the overall series is titled Designing for Equity, Three Pillars to Guide State Policy. It is really a three-part series that breaks up our state policy agenda into the three pillars. And today's webinar number 2, is focused on student financial aid. The entire webinar, or really our whole state policy agenda, obviously it's not just Lumina, right? It's all of you in the field who have come together working with Lumina, many researchers, many state policy leads and experts, to help us craft this agenda that really champions equity across states. And man, let me tell you something. My colleagues are fabulous. The state policy team led by Scott Jenkins, Strategy Director for State Policy, and as well as Paula Santana and Amanda De La Rosa, both of whom are state strategy officers for state policy. The three of them make up a state policy team. And for today's webinar, webinar 2 on student financial aid, Paula will be your moderator and Amanda will provide closing remarks. Just want to share a few things before I hand it over to Paula. First and foremost is we'd love for you to, use these webinars as resources, right, for yourself. And so during today's webinar, go ahead and use the chat. We also will have, put your questions in the chat. We'll drop resources in the chat. We just want you to have all of that information available. The second is that we actually are going to do a hashtag Lumina State Policy, for those of you who want to go ahead and tweet any of your questions or anything along the way. You're certainly welcome to do that. And the final thing I'll share is that webinar 1, which was moderated by Scott, and the closing provided by Paula, focused on student-centered funding formulas, and that is available on our website, and we want to encourage you to go ahead and look at that. It was, let me tell you something. I, as a former SHEO staffer, I loved all of it. And I know I'm going to really lean into today's webinar too. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close it out and then hand it over to Paula. So please let us know if you have any questions and just take it away, Paula. Thanks again for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the second installment of Lumina Foundation's State Policy Webinars. My name is Paula Santana, and I have the pleasure of serving as Strategy Officer for State Policy at the Foundation. At Lumina, we're driven by one goal and one goal only, that by the year 2025, 60% of Americans hold a high-quality post-high school credential, inclusive of baccalaureate degrees, associate degrees, certificates, or industry-recognized certifications. Our approach to getting to this national goal puts racial equity at the center of everything we do. We define racial equity as being achieved when outcomes, such as the likelihood of having a degree or other quality credential, cannot be predicted by a person's race or ethnicity. We believe that racial justice will be achieved when the policies, practices, and root causes of inequitable outcomes have been eliminated. And so we think that state policymakers have a very important opportunity to address policies that are rooted in history that keep many people of color from receiving the education and building the skills that they need, and that policymakers can help address the systemic barriers which unfairly hold people back. At Lumina, our state policy work is guided by an agenda that seeks to build a fairer, more racially just post-secondary education and training system supported by three pillars. If you were with us last month, you learned about our first pillar, which focuses on robust and equitable state financing of the institutions that serve the largest share in the highest percentages of students of color, students from families with low incomes, and working age adults. Our second pillar, which will be the focus of today's event, focuses on coherent and comprehensive programs of student financial aid that serve those in the greatest financial need, especially among students of color. And the last pillar, which we're going to highlight next month, focuses on inclusive pathways for adult learners to earn quality credentials. So again, today's conversation will focus on Pillar 2, student financial aid. We know that access to adequate financial aid can be a game changer for students, particularly those from families with low incomes, for students of color, and for adult learners. So the need is really great. Lumina's research has shown that nearly a third of all college students come from families living at or below the federal policy poverty line, while 36% struggle with not knowing where their next meal will come from, and nearly 1 in 10 lack stable housing. So we believe that there are significant improvements that can be made to state financial aid programs to ensure that they serve as a conduit for opportunity for the students who need it the most. So we're super excited about today's conversation with colleagues that are working to improve financial aid within their respective states. And I'm going to introduce Kristen Holdquist. She is the founding partner at HCM Strategist. She's going to introduce our panel and help guide the discussion. Thank you so much for being with us, Kristen. Please take it away.
Welcome. My name is Kristen Holdquist. I am the founding partner of a policy and advocacy consulting firm called HCM Strategists. I'm pleased to be able to introduce my colleagues who are warriors in the battle to make college and post-secondary learning opportunities more affordable for all Americans, particularly for adults, for low-income students, for Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans. So I'd like to start with introducing Dr. Angie Piccioni. She is the executive director of the Colorado Department of Higher Education. Angie is herself a first-generation student. And Angie, will you introduce yourself now?
Oh, sure. We're glad to. Yes, Angie Bertone, originally from the Bronx, New York, but here in Colorado for over 36 years, and currently the executive director of the Department of Higher Education, a position appointed by the governor. And looking forward to this conversation, trying to find more ways that we can get more students in school.
Dr. Bertone is a former legislator. You will see the connection to the professional experiences of other warriors for affordability. And Marlene Garcia, Marlene, a longtime senior legislative staffer in California, who now serves as the executive director of the California Student Aid Commission. Marlene.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome everyone. Marlene Garcia, I'm the executive director of the California Student Aid Commission, which is the largest state financial aid organization in the country, serving close to 500,000 students each year with a budget of about $3.8 billion for student financial aid. I'm really pleased to be here today.
Thank you. And last but not least, our colleague from the Commonwealth of Virginia, heading on the other side of the country. Tom Allison has joined us. He is a senior associate for finance at the State Council for Higher Education in Virginia. And before that, Tom had a career advocating for students from the position of Young Invincibles. So Tom, would you introduce yourself a bit more?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kristen. Again, my name is Tom Allison. I'm a senior associate for finance and innovation at SHEV. We're the coordinating board for higher education in Virginia, and sort of wear a bunch of different hats, but one of them is data analysis and its application to the policy and budget making process. So thanks so much for inviting me, and it's great to be here with so many esteemed colleagues.
That's terrific. Well, we know that there is no time to waste in trying to make sure that a college post-secondary credential is within the hands of all Americans. It is the path to the American middle class, and the ability to afford it is a key barrier that students face in this country, adult students and students of color in particular. So why don't I start off and ask each of you this question. In what ways has your state advanced affordability for a high quality post-secondary credential since this global pandemic started? We'll start with Dr. Bertone.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. And I would say there's things that we are doing that we have been doing. So the pandemic didn't impact that. We have some great programs in Colorado that help students who are need-based, students who are first generation, students who are BIPOC. One of those programs is called the Colorado Opportunity Scholarship Initiative, which is designed for those three populations in particular. And that gives both matching scholarship dollars and support for wraparound services. This is a highly effective program. We've had it since about 2014, and it sends many students to college with a full ride scholarship, if you will, in terms of paying for tuition. And I have witnessed when those students get that oversized check and they talk about where they're going to college. And I've talked to their siblings who are younger, and I asked them, are you going to college? And they say, yeah, I'm going where she's going. And so it changes the entire trajectory of a family when they realize that college and other post-secondary opportunities are actually in reach for them. And so we've even had parents say, hey, I think I'm going to go back to school. If my kid can go, I can go. And so it really does change the landscape for many communities that would otherwise not go. So that's one of them. And of course, we do have, as many states do, a corpus of dollars that we put for state financial aid that will supplement what the institutions give and, of course, what students can get from the federal government. And so that corpus for Colorado, remember, we're a small population state, but it's about $220 million. And so we are somewhat of a pass-through to the institutions so they can use that to package financial aid for students as they apply. So those are two things that we do, and I think we do really well.
Excellent. Excellent. Marlene, in California, I appreciate that Dr. Bertone talked about the $200+ million investment that the Colorado taxpayers have made in college affordability. But in California, with a bigger population, you're looking at right now about $2.4 billion that's spent. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think since the pandemic the state has done to try and improve college affordability?
Well, one thing is clear is that prior to the pandemic, we were already seeing huge affordability issues. 1 in 3 students reported in any given month that they were experiencing food insecurity or housing insecurity. And so we were already acutely aware of the need to cover basic needs much more effectively. So we were really in the process of trying to advocate for a redesign of our existing state financial aid program, the Cal Grant program, our signature program, and then COVID hit. We thought things would come to a standstill, but because the problems were only exacerbated with the pandemic and it became even clearer just how much students were struggling, that we were able to really regain momentum. And last year in the budget, the governor and legislature approved about $178 million investment to provide community college students a guarantee that if they have need, they will get financial aid. Previously to this action, many community college students found themselves in a competitive pool, and only 41,000 students would get an award. After this action, there were 100,000 more students who got Cal Grant awards in addition to the 41,000. So this is a huge opportunity for students during the pandemic, and we're of course continuing to advocate as we continue to struggle with hunger on campuses.
Thank you. Thank you. And Tom, in Virginia, I know some significant reforms were in process and then the pandemic hit. Can you talk a little bit about how the state has focused on affordability in the last couple of years?
Sure thing. So in 2019, the legislature directed Chev to study how we fund financial aid in Virginia. And we are a decentralized state. The state provides an allocation to each institution, but really we hadn't looked at that formula for allocation in a couple decades. So we took a deep dive into our student level data to get a better understanding of how different sources of aid interact with students' unmet need. Unmet need basically being their full cost of attendance minus all gift aid minus all the expected family contribution. And among other things, we found some quirks in our formula, but one of the big takeaways was that despite all the federal aid and the state aid that was being directed more to low-income students, at the end of the day, low-income students still had higher unmet need than middle-income and higher-income students, despite the aid there. So we knew we needed to redesign that allocation formula. So we did that in 2019 to drive more funds to institutions that enroll more low-income students. And we do that, and we also realize that unmet need is so important because of its relationship to graduation rates. There's a lot of research out there, but generally a reduction of $2,000 in unmet need will buy you a 3% increase in graduation rate. So we really framed this as a completion strategy to invest in higher education and invest in students' affordability. So that came just in time. The new formula, frankly, for the pandemic, because during the pandemic, Virginia's been fortunate to have pretty steady fiscal management and strong revenues. So that's allowed for these additional investments. And so between fiscal year 2020 and 2022, state financial aid increased $80 million. And that's a 36% increase. And a big part of that was our tuition-free community college program called the G3 program, which eliminates tuition for low and middle income students pursuing high demand fields at our community colleges. So, I think that's the sort of investments that I think are going to make a difference. And we're, currently using the same formula to advocate for an even larger investment in the next biennium in the General Assembly session that just started this week.
That's great. So if I can recap, I've heard state leadership for affordability, really the program administrative changes that Tom Allison just talked about, what that research foreshadowed. We have the budget adopted in the California legislature in the last session. Angie, can you tell us how Colorado has steered some of those federal stimulus funds that went to states? I think what you've done and how you've targeted adults is something that's worth sharing.
Yeah, thank you for that. And when we look at affordability, of course, we look at other ways beyond just the general fund and what we can do for state financial aid. We also have a big program around OER, Open Education Resources, to help students reduce the cost of textbooks, or eliminate the cost of textbooks. And so there's other ways as well that we surround the student with ways to make it more affordable. With the federal dollars, we did a couple of things. One, we put money immediately into what we call return to work. So for students who were, or not students, but adults who were impacted by COVID, lost their jobs or became underemployed, we were able to also provide scholarship support and wraparound services to get them back to work. We have another program to try to get students while they were educating at home to finish what they started. So that's another program, and working alongside with the organization called 1 Million Degrees. And so trying to entice students back to the campus, figuratively in a way, but to re-earn or continue earning that degree. So those two programs got money right away. And then we also put a task force together. And the task force was to look at how do we revitalize the workforce and how do we really achieve student success. And that very large task force and subcommittees of that task force started with about, I think it was around 96 ideas, and we've whittled it down to about 6 main ideas, and we've sent that off to the governor and to the legislature about how we can use those monies to really help students succeed, but also revitalize the workforce.
Excellent. Excellent. In either California or Virginia, would you like to share the ways in which you think those federal dollars might have stimulated focus on our priority populations, or also just an expansion of benefits?
I think given the flexibility of some of the federal funds, particularly the state aid portion of HERIF, has really shined a light on the indirect costs that students face, just living expenses and the like, some of the issues that Angie mentioned. So that flexibility that the student aid portion of HERIF came with, I think really has started a good conversation about the importance of looking at a student's full cost of attendance, their full need, and how that can really make a difference in keeping a student in school, perhaps while taking care of a family, taking, both generations, both children and perhaps an older family member, and balancing work and other priorities. So I think that's something that look forward to seeing some of the impacts on student success and retention based on those federal funds.
I'll add that California, similar to Colorado, actually utilized its federal funding to invest in two programs dealing with helping individuals really effectively move into the workplace. But one was specifically targeted, 500 million, targeted for individuals who lost their jobs due to COVID. And California established this program to really identify those displaced workers who are also disconnected from education systems, training and education systems. So the California Student Aid Commission was directed to develop this program from the ground up, which we're in the process of doing now. And I'm really quite pleased to be doing this. This is definitely outside of our wheelhouse. We don't normally deal with students who haven't come to the higher ed system, but we are having an opportunity to take this one-time allocation over 3 years to examine how we can more effectively address the needs of adults who aren't yet connected to the educational system. And so we're right now working with a variety of workforce development groups, local community partners, labor, business, and trying to figure out how we identify those individuals out there and say, hey, we have a grant for you if you're interested in retooling, upskilling, reskilling to continue to thrive and grow in the workforce. So that's something we will be implementing what we're calling the quick start portion of our program this spring, and then we hope to expand the population of students that we serve in the next 2 or 3 phases. So we're eager to do that. We're also we got a $500 million funding from the federal government to launch a new learning aligned employment program, which is very similar to a state work study program. But this one instead is really focused on how we provide low-income students direct access in the workplace to careers they may want to consider. So it prioritizes STEM, health, and a lot of other key areas. And so we're actually looking and exploring whether or not we can look at an apprenticeship model or pre-apprenticeship model that not only will expose these students to careers, but hopefully promise them a job. So that's what we're looking at now. Whether or not that comes to fruition, we'll see, but we're certainly interested in doing what we can to steer students, especially the lowest income students, into these thriving careers and good jobs.
If I may, Kristen, I love that. It's so aligned, and I love that across the country we're all kind of looking in the same direction of how do we really activate the potential that exists in our communities. And we have a community in Colorado that is the highest in terms of unemployment and also the highest in non-high school completers. So we're looking at a program that would take those adult basic ed, if you will, and have them earn a GED, simultaneously earn a credential like a CNA. And then we have right now in that community 50 jobs open right now for CNAs in our state-run long-term care facilities. And so they would immediately get a job. And then we have, thanks to the U.S. Department of Labor's apprenticeship grant that we received, we can put them right into an apprenticeship program where they can earn their LPN and then again onto their RN. So it's from a GED to an actual career with solid salary earnings that are sustainable. And so I'm very excited about that. I think we're going to launch that in the next week or two, and then we want to scale that across the state. So, and I think what Marlene said is so important. There has to be a job waiting for you. And in this case, in the healthcare professions in particular, we have jobs waiting. We just need to get the bodies and get them trained and get them certified and get them into those jobs.
I love the enthusiasm you all are bringing for this kind of core reason why we care about affordability at all. And that's this idea that people have innate talent and they have aspiration, and we actually have jobs. And we really want to see more people have economic independence and thrive with better skills. So let's talk about, one of the things that I'm hearing across the three of you is just how much you're trying to simplify this process of accessing aid. And let's explore first how you're helping adults in particular who have children and have expenses that go beyond books and a laptop, how you're helping them access federal means benefits. I think there's some real innovation going on here, some real partnership that I encourage you to boast about, because this is really something that should be a 50-state solution.
Yeah, I would say, again, I'm going to mention COSI a lot, our Colorado Opportunity Scholarship Initiative, because it does come with the wraparound support services. But also the Colorado Workforce Development Council also has great access to federal funds and state funds. And they also have a big push. And together, we have a website called Ready to Rise, CO for Colorado.org. And on that website, students can go, and there's a whole menu of ways that they can become engaged in opportunities that will help further their career. And like Marlene said earlier, whether it's upskilling, reskilling, new skilling, there are ways to get back into engagement with the state, where the state can provide those kinds of supports and those kinds of services to get them all the way through. I think, like many states, we have so many people who have some college but no degree. We have people who started jobs thinking they were going to go somewhere and they didn't go. And so, we have all of this potential that exists. And anyone who knows me, if who's watching this, that's my personal credo is around activating potential. We have too much unactivated potential in our communities. And so we in higher ed and post-secondary, we are an avenue, a conduit to helping people activate their potential and get a good job. And so, yeah, all of those support services and ways that we can help, we're trying to do. In addition, one last thing is we're looking at trying to have daycare centers on the most strategic college campuses and our community colleges as well, where students can use that daycare facility for their kids, but also it becomes a clinical site for those who are studying early childhood education. So when we have that kind of dual purpose, then we get better bang for the buck, and helps people get into post-secondary education.
Marlene, I think you have something pretty innovative that you're excited about.
Well, what we're really looking at this year, our number one priority is to complete the Cal Grant reform effort that we started last year. We were so grateful for the legislature and the governor to fund the entitlement piece for community college students. But what we need to do is simplify the process. We have 7 different varieties of Cal Grant programs, and we'd like to simplify it to be Cal Grant 2 for community college students, Cal Grant for students attending a 4-year institution. And right now, at this moment in time when we're losing so many students who are just opting out of college altogether because they think it's unattainable or it's too expensive, we need to simplify, and we need to send a clear message that this is how much money is available for you to go to college, and this is what you need to do to be eligible. Those clear messages, we believe, are essential for really reaching deep into those communities who've been struggling the most and have just decided, I don't think this is for me. And because we've seen such a huge loss of enrollment in California, as well as the country, and a deep decline in financial aid participation, we're really doubling down, and we're saying we need to simplify the message, we need to simplify the process, and we need to let students and families know that there is a lot of money out there to help them pay for college, not just tuition, but also basic needs. So that's what keeps me excited about this work in the midst of this ongoing pandemic. But the students need us more than ever. And so that's what our commitment will be this upcoming year.
Building on top of that, Marlene, thinking about students who are not engaged in the system overall compared to ones that maybe already in the pipeline. Because in Virginia, the students that come on onto our campuses get a great education, and they have some of the highest graduation rates in the country, just sort of as a baseline. We can always improve, but just looking at those students ignores the whole swath of students that are just not don't have the capacity, financially, or really, I mean, just with balancing their time to pursue a traditional degree. So, I mean, there's all sorts of initiatives going on in Virginia. I just want to highlight two very quickly. First has to do with basic needs, just because we've been talking about basic needs. Virginia recently leveraged our longitudinal data system to match our student records with our SNAP program through the Virginia Department of Social Services. So we actually know at a campus level how many students are eligible for SNAP and how many are receiving that benefit. And that can help us figure out which campuses to prioritize outreach on for this federal benefit that is relatively cumbersome, but at the same time, at least we can help our campuses understand the scope of the issue. And I think there's a lot of surprises too for some of our elite institutions with very large endowments who still have students that are receiving SNAP, but also are eligible and not participating. So that's been helpful, just starting with data to be able to guide us. The second piece, Kristen, just because you mentioned adult learners, and I do think that that can be a hard sell for someone that's trying to balance work and family to try to pursue a traditional 4-year degree. But of course people do it. But I definitely want to highlight the Workforce Credential Grant Program in Virginia, which funds at a performance level short-term, non-credit and some credit workforce credentials. You earn a credential or a license that's nationally recognized. And the median age learner in the Workforce Credential Grant Program is 32 years old. And I believe the 75th percentile is around 45. So these are short-term programs that learners and workers can get credentialed, licensed, and really stack with very little cost to them. And it's funded at a performance level from the state. And is really directly aligned with what's going to benefit them in the workforce right away. So I think the Workforce Credential Grant Program is a way that students can see the impact in the workforce in a much shorter time frame. So that's something that we're definitely looking to improve on, and but just wanted to highlight as well.
Thank you for doing that. So I'm going to ask you to share a little bit with others, and what, as you are stewards of affordability programs in your state, what keeps you up at night as you try to think about activating potential, to use Dr. Bertone's expression? What keeps you up at night?
I'll jump in. I do sleep pretty well, I have to say, but that's only because I know how to compartmentalize pretty well. But what does keep me up during the day is trying to figure out ways. We in Colorado, we do have some constraints in terms of our TABOR, which is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which really puts a cap on how much revenue the state can keep and hold. And so that puts a constraint on general fund dollars. We have so many great ideas and we have so many great programs that could be even better if we were allowed to keep more of the taxpayer dollars. And so that keeps me up at night. I think one of the things, and we all talk about this, are what we call the social determinants of student success. And that means, as Tom was just talking about, the food insecurity. We have 80,000 college students in Colorado who are eligible for SNAP and not applying. And that translates to over $200 million a year that could go into our local communities at their grocery stores. And so, but more than going into the grocery stores as an economic development or a stimulus, it's those students. I don't say this all the time, but I was a college athlete at Stanford University, one of the best schools in the country. But my first semester, I didn't have a meal plan. That was some decisions that I made, but I know what it was like to be hungry that first quarter at Stanford. And so trying to be a student and be hungry, it's almost impossible. And then when we talk about mental health issues as another social determinant of student success, and then housing and transportation. And so that keeps me up during the day, and mostly a little bit as I fall asleep. How can we really address those outside issues so that we make attending post-secondary options easier for students to do? So that would be my answer.
Now we know something about Dr. Bertone, that she played for Stanford. I'm guessing basketball? Yep, excellent. Excellent. Marlene, what keeps you up at night? Or are you, like Dr. Bertone, pretty good at compartmentalizing?
No, my mind wanders at night. I wish I fell right to sleep. What really keeps me up at night and has me most concerned right now is a lost generation of students and adults who could have benefited from training and education have just decided this is not for me. What I've been really doing a lot of reflection on this whole question of affordability. Obviously, it's not new, but what is new is that the level of poverty is increasing for college students. They are not the same college students as 50 years ago. They are struggling with food insecurities and housing. And I've been looking at, when I first kind of entered this financial aid world, I looked at, the solution is to fix the Cal Grant. And as I realized, then I pulled back and said, well, the solution is to fix the Cal Grant by leveraging federal, state, and institutional financial aid to more comprehensively provide those resources to students. But now I'm stepping back and reflecting, to fix college affordability is to fix traditional financial aid, but make that a gateway or a platform for students, especially the students living in poverty who are struggling with hunger, to give them easy access and on-ramps to other social benefit services, namely SNAP. We spent the past year looking at SNAP in California, and our participation rates amongst college students are super low. There's about 700,000 students that we estimate are eligible for SNAP. Only 127,000 students actually apply and get SNAP. So what we realize is, how many times you have to prove you're poor? You prove it already in the FAFSA. Then you have to prove it with the SNAP form. Then you have to prove it with, we call it CalWorks. And so one of my visions for college affordability is looking at how we can link traditional financial aid, state, federal, and institutional, to those special social services, especially for the lowest income, 0 EFC or maximum Pell Grant students who are struggling with the basic needs. And there's where we can provide greater access to those supports that they need to persist and graduate from college. I mean, that's the number one goal, is get in and out into that workforce with a good job. So that's what keeps me up. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about how we really create the narrative around what students need.
Excellent. Tom, are you willing to share?
I was just thinking, in the virtual green room, we were discussing whether we engage in any federal advocacy in our states. And gosh, it sure seems like streamlining some of the SNAP eligibility rules should be on our list of things to advocate for, because this is a nationwide problem where a lot of students should be eligible, and there are multiple reasons we think why they're not participating in the program and receiving those benefits to which they're entitled. But the application process has to be one, and just some of the hoops that students have to jump through. So that's immediately what I was thinking about. But also just what keeps me up at night has to do largely with student debt, which is an item that we don't have as much control over at the state level, and what you don't see, you don't think about as much, and so something might look affordable. There's this whole just tranche of debt that students are taking on at higher rates, and just more and more of it. It just seems like something that we know is going to keep people from being able to save, to start a family, buy a house, just general economic prosperity. And what does that mean in terms of the role of higher education and its value? We recently issued a survey of graduates of Virginia public institutions, and while over 85% were satisfied with their education. Barely half thought it was worth the cost. So what does that mean when we've got these 30-point gaps between, I'm sad my education was good versus whether it was worth the cost or not? And I think that's going to trickle down to the lost generation, Marlene, as you put it. That you'll see your siblings, your family, your neighbors with this crippling debt that that gives you fewer choices instead of more, which is what a higher education is supposed to do. And in terms of it, being a generational issue, every single year in Virginia, 25,000 students graduate from high school and don't enroll in a college program somewhere. So it's just like every single year, with folks missing out on the opportunity, but at the same time taking out more debt. So, I also sleep pretty well, but that's something that deeply concerns me. Yeah.
Kristen, again, sorry if I may. Our governor, Governor Polis, is really committed to affordability. He launched the affordability roadmap a couple of years ago that had short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals on that. And one of those was to create we call the CASFA. So it's the Colorado application for student financial aid, and that's for our undocumented students. The governor has long time held a commitment to our undocumented students through DACA and through other measures, and so that's one of them. So those students can also apply for state aid. They can't apply for federal, and so there are many things on there, including cost containment at the institutional level as well, so that we don't have to keep increasing tuition. And so all of these things, as you heard from my colleagues here, there are so many. It's almost like whack-a-mole. Like you whack one and then the other pops up. It's like, oh yeah, we forgot about that one. And we there's so much that needs to be done. There's so much that we are doing. And part of it that I'm seeing as well is that we can't get the word out far and wide enough. So we have a lot of programs. And whenever I'm out in the community, I'm always asking, do you know about this or have you heard about that? And nobody knows. And so we need to do a better job of making known what is available, like federal benefits and state benefits and programs and initiatives that we have. We have to make sure this tent stays as wide as possible, and we bring lots of people in to get new skills, reskilled, upskilled, even just but a credential to start so that you can make more than you would with just a high school diploma. So we're working hard, as you can tell. We're passionate, as you can tell, and I'll just say, Lumina is a big help with both in terms of strategy and policy and resources, and we wouldn't get as far as we have without the support.
Thanks, Angie. Again, with the passion that you bring to this subject, I'm thankful that you brought up the issue of communicating authentically to communities, getting in and making sure they're getting the word. They're getting the word and they're getting people they trust. Is anyone else besides, my colleagues in California or Virginia feel that they have an example of an excellent strategy to reach students, particularly those who might not have any prior experience with post-secondary education in their family?
What I will say is, and we all talked about the issues that keep us up, and we're motivated and passionate about doing this work because we believe there is a path forward that's going to be better. And as my good friend and mentor, Dr. Jack Scott used to say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I think that we're really at this inflection point, and we say that a lot, but right now we all agree we really are. And we're going to rethink how we do things in communication to the masses of people who really need to access some type of education beyond high school to have that livable wage is really critical. And I think that this disruption that we're seeing is going to get us to really think about how we leverage technology and couple it with the human interaction. I have to say, I just recently learned about Ollie, the Common App, artificial intelligence chatbot, who was so successful in reaching first generation students and staying with them for a year, getting them from applying to financial aid to applying to college and then enrolling. And then at the last meeting, Ollie said to the students, this is our last time together. Good luck to you, and I wish you well. And it went viral. All the students, there were 500 students who had developed this relationship with Ollie, and they all wrote about how they miss Ollie, and Ollie broke up with them. It was all over social media. But as fun and interesting as that example is, I think this is a moment where we have to think about different ways to communicate with and reach students. I just use that as a fun example, but we have to think differently. And we do have new technological capabilities at our disposal that we can leverage to couple the daily interaction with students. We never want to eliminate human interaction. That's always the best and most effective, but we're never going to scale every kind of communication that we need into that direct human contact. So we have to think creatively. And I'm excited about the potential and the prospects for doing things differently going forward within education. And certificates and degrees are on the table. And that's not going to change because we need the skills in our workforce. So I'm positive, despite all the gloomy forecasts around us. I think that we're going to come out of this stronger.
That's great. Tom, do you have anything to share, or shall we move to our last question?
Not particularly. I think the IRS communicates better than Chev in terms of getting information out there. So we have a lot of nuance, and so we do try to recognize the variation in our institutions. But yeah, with that nuance and complexity, you can make more informed decisions, but we don't always simplify our communications where they could.
Excellent. All right, so taking off this cue of all of you and this energy that is virtual, I know we all yearn to be able to work in person with students and with each other again. So let's imagine it's December of 2022 and we all are gathered, and I have bought you a glass of wine and we are toasting the gain or success or win for college affordability that you were able to accomplish this year. What would each of you look back and say, we got this done for students?
I'll start. Mine is pretty clear cut. As a major first step in this affordability journey is Cal Grant reform, a comprehensive Cal Grant reform.
Fewer programs, more community college and adult students accessing the benefits for non-tuition costs. Anything else to summarize that equity framework? And simplicity, tied to that photo methodology. So again, as we've talked about in this call, don't make students apply 6, 7 different times. This is craziness. All right, Angie?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a great visioning kinds of question. And, in Colorado, we have about 81% of our high school students graduate from high school, but we have only a 56% college going rate, similar to some of what Tom said earlier. And so to see that rate hit the 80s as well, to have the college going rate match the graduation rate, I think would be tremendous. I think getting the SNAP completion rate in the 80s as well, the FAFSA completion rate in the 80s. I think 80 is going to be my number for the next few years here. If we can hit 80 on those, wow, will we have been making a great difference. Yeah, that's going to be, I just decided that just now. 80 is my number.
So we'll cheers to 80.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. How about you, Tom?
I'll be looking at the numbers, particularly as it comes to completions and student debt and unmet need. I really want to see if the federal funds that we've distributed to student aid has paid off. I want to see our investments in state aid and our investments in tuition moderation start to make a difference, particularly for our student populations that don't succeed at the same rates. And who suffer from more disadvantages, whether they be racial, social, or economic. So I'll be looking for what these investments in dollars have been buying us.
Excellent. Well, then I'm going to take moderator's prerogative to give all of you, the state leaders who Lumina have so wisely brought together today, as well as those of you watching, give you a charge, a leading indicator of the progress we can make towards those data points that Tom is looking at, towards that activating potential that Angie speaks about, are FAFSA completion rates. We know they're down. We know they've been down for several years. Let's set in each of our states and in our communities FAFSA completion targets, and let's disaggregate those targets. Let's disaggregate them not just by free and reduced lunch, let's disaggregate them by race, ethnicity, and by age, because as we've talked about, it's really about making sure that the adults who are supporting families have that on-ramp that federal financial aid provides. So do you have targets, growth targets, ambitious targets, that December end of year looking back? I encourage you to set them and disaggregate them, because what you measure, you get done.
I think
thank
we're
you
going to
all.
adopt 80 for FAFSA completion.
80. Come on.
I'm just saying that, but it sounds like a great number to start with.
It does. It does. It's ambitious and actionable. I like that. I thank you all, though, for being with us today. A number of us on this call really are the beneficiaries of the blessings of financial aid. And so for your leadership in the states, and Lumina for your leadership, making this a top priority for all states to embrace as they strive to reach their attainment goals. And that 60% of the US population has some quality credential beyond high school. We thank you, Lumina, for this opportunity.
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda De La Rosa, and I serve as Strategy Officer for State Policy at Lumina Foundation. We hope you took something valuable and actionable away from today's event on Lumina Foundation's State Policy Agenda. Our agenda focuses on 3 pillars, which we believe can help states increase post-secondary attainment and build fairer, more racially just post-secondary education systems. Last month, you heard from experts about equitable funding formulas and other state finance policies. Today, we focused on state financial aid, the second pillar of our policy agenda. And next month, we invite you to join us on March 8th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the final virtual event in this 3-part series. There, we will dive deeply into recognition of learning policies and make the case that state policymakers have an important role to play in shaping and improving inclusive pathways for adults of color. As more learners take advantage of quality short-term credentials, we'll explore ways that some states are already forging ahead to make those pathways meaningful, both for learners and for employers. You can register for our March 8th event on today's webinar page or through the email that you'll be receiving in the coming days. If you're a state policymaker interested in exploring these policy priorities within your state, Lumina Foundation is here to help you. Through Lumina's Strategy Labs, we support state leaders' efforts to increase education levels by offering nonpartisan research, data, peer advice, and expert consulting support. We also offer small dollar, quick turnaround technical assistance grants to eligible state entities to help you on your attainment agenda. You can learn more about those opportunities on our website. Thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.